Imagine this. You're settling into a lavish first-class seat you've paid a small fortune for, ready for a transatlantic flight. A young woman dressed in a simple sweatsuit sits across from you. You judge her instantly. She can't possibly belong here. You spend the next hour making your disdain known, belittling her to the crew, convinced she's a freeloader who has somehow slipped through the cracks. But then, just before the cabin doors close, two men in sharp suits walk in. They don't approach the captain. They walk straight to her. And as they greet her by name, the entire world you thought you knew flips upside down. You haven't been insulting some random girl. You've been insulting the one person who holds your entire future in her hands. Stay tuned for a story of epic karma. The scent of privilege was the first thing that hit you in the British Airways Concorde room at London Heathrow's Terminal 5. It wasn't the expensive perfume of the women or the aged leather of the Tom Ford briefcases, but a more intangible aroma, a blend of entitlement, quiet confidence, and the faint, sterile smell of recycled air conditioned to a precise 21 degrees Celsius. It was a scent Eleanor Vance breathed in like oxygen. At 54, with a razor-sharp bob of silver hair and a Chloe pantsuit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, she navigated this space as if it were her own living room. She selected a velvet armchair with a view of the tarmac, placing her Hermes Birkin bag on the adjacent seat as a silent but clear "Do Not Disturb" sign. A waiter materialized instantly. "A glass of Bollinger Grand Année 2014, she said. Not as a request, but as a statement of fact. He nodded and vanished. Eleanor was flying to New York for a crucial final round negotiation. Her consulting firm, Vance & Sterling, was on the cusp of landing a multi-million-pound contract with a legacy airline, and she was the closer. Everything in her life was curated, controlled, and of the highest quality, from her wine to the people she allowed into her orbit. It was then that she saw her. The girl couldn't have been older than 22. She was curled up in an armchair in a far corner, almost trying to make herself invisible. She was wearing a plain gray cotton sweatsuit, the kind one might wear to the gym or for a lazy day on the sofa. A pair of well-worn Nike trainers were on her feet, and a simple black backpack lay at her side. Her hair was styled in intricate box braids that cascaded over her shoulders. She was scrolling through her phone, a small, serene smile on her face as she typed. Eleanor felt a prickle of irritation. The Concorde room was a sanctuary, a bastion of exclusivity for those who had earned their place at the top. It was for Gold Card members, for first-class passengers. This girl with her casual attire and youthful air was an anomaly, an unwelcome sight. Eleanor scanned her from head to toe, her lips tightening into a thin line of disapproval. Probably a guest of a guest, she reasoned, some C-list celebrity's new girlfriend, or perhaps a competition winner enjoying a once-in-a-lifetime prize. The thought was distasteful. The airline was getting far too lax with its standards. Her champagne arrived, the bubbles fizzing delicately in the crystal flute. She took a sip, the crisp taste momentarily soothing her annoyance. But her eyes kept drifting back to the girl. She watched as the girl stood up and walked over to the buffet, a graceful, athletic stride that annoyed Eleanor for reasons she couldn't articulate. The girl picked up a small plate and selected a few pastries, a banana, and a bottle of water. So pedestrian, so economical. Eleanor caught the eye of the lounge manager, a polished man named Julian she'd known for years. She gave a subtle, almost imperceptible flick of her head in the girl's direction. Julian's professional smile didn't waver, but he understood the signal. He approached Eleanor's table. "Good morning, Miss Vance. A pleasure to see you again. Is everything to your satisfaction?" "Julian," Eleanor began, her voice a low, confidential purr. "The lounge is lovely as always. The Bollinger is perfect, but—" She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. The standards seemed to have slipped. Julian's gaze followed hers. He saw the young woman, now back in her seat, nibbling on a croissant. "I'm sorry to hear you feel that way, Miss Vance." "How so?" "That," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with disdain, "is how so. Look at her. A child in a tracksuit. Is this a public bus station now? One pays a premium for a certain ambiance, for a certain caliber of fellow traveler. She looks like she should be flying cargo. Julian's smile became a little more fixed. He knew this dance well. All guests in the Concord room meet the entry requirements, Miss Vance. She is a full-fare first-class ticket holder. Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Are you certain? There must be some mistake. Perhaps her ticket was booked with stolen points? You should check her credentials. Thoroughly. She leaned in, her voice dropping further. We both know the types who try to game the system. The coded language was unmistakable. The types. Julian, a consummate professional, felt a flash of discomfort. He had seen the girl's boarding pass. He knew her name. He also knew he was not paid enough to challenge a passenger like Eleanor Vance directly. I can assure you all is in order, he said smoothly. Perhaps she is simply a more modern traveler. The Silicon Valley types often prefer comfort over formality. He offered it as a plausible explanation, a way to smooth the ruffled feathers of his high-value client. Eleanor was not placated. Silicon Valley is new money, Julian. It lacks breeding. This is precisely my point. She waved a dismissive hand. Just keep an eye on her, and make sure my luggage is boarded first. I don't want it getting mixed up with hers. She turned her attention back to the tarmac, a silent dismissal. Julian retreated, his posture ramrod straight, but with a knot of resentment tightening in his stomach. Across the room, Maya Sinclair was oblivious to the quiet drama she was causing. She was texting her dad. Landed safely. In the lounge now. You were right, the pastries are amazing. A reply came back almost instantly. Glad you made it, sweetheart. Enjoy the quiet before the chaos in New York. Did you get any sleep on the flight from Nairobi? Maya smiled. A little. Too excited. See you soon, Dad. Love you. Love you more. Don't let anyone give you any trouble. Maya looked up from her phone, her gaze sweeping across the opulent room. Her eyes met Eleanor's for a fleeting second. She saw the undisguised contempt in the older woman's stare. Maya had seen that look before. It was a look that judged her, weighed her, and found her wanting, all in a single cold glance. She wasn't a stranger to it. Growing up navigating elite spaces, she had learned to read the subtle cues of prejudice like a second language. Instead of looking away or shrinking, Maya held Eleanor's gaze. She offered a small, polite smile, a gesture of simple human acknowledgement. For Eleanor, that smile was like a lit match tossed on gasoline. The audacity. The girl wasn't just an eyesore, she was defiant. Eleanor broke the gaze with a sharp turn of her head, her jaw clenched. The flight couldn't board soon enough. This whole experience was leaving a sour taste in her mouth. She finished her champagne in one long, decisive gulp, the bubbles doing nothing to quell the simmering rage inside her. The girl's presence was a personal affront, a stain on her otherwise perfect morning. And Eleanor Vance was not a woman who tolerated imperfections. The call for boarding was a welcome relief for Eleanor. She gathered her Birkin, smoothed down her already immaculate pantsuit, and made her way towards gate B46 with the unhurried certainty of someone who knows they will always be allowed to go first. The first class and gold card lane was, in her opinion, the only civilized way to enter an aircraft. She presented her boarding pass to the gate agent, a young man with a neatly trimmed beard and a patient demeanor. "Good morning," he said with a practiced smile. "Enjoy your flight to New York, Miss Vance." As he handed back her pass, Eleanor glanced over her shoulder and saw the girl in the gray sweatsuit walking towards the same priority lane. A fresh wave of indignation washed over her. This was simply unacceptable. Maya approached the desk and held out her phone to display her digital boarding pass. The agent scanned it. "Good morning, Miss Sinclair. Have a pleasant flight." "Thank you, you too," Maya replied cheerfully, stepping aside to let the next passenger through. Eleanor hadn't moved. She stood there, a formidable obstacle in a cream-colored suit, her arms crossed. She turned back to the gate agent, her expression thunderous. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I believe there has been a serious error." The agent, whose name tag read Arav, maintained his professional calm. "I'm sorry, madam. Is there a problem with your ticket?" "My ticket is fine," Eleanor snapped, gesturing impatiently towards Maya, who was now standing a few feet away, patiently waiting to walk down the jet bridge. "Her ticket is the problem. There is no conceivable way that person is flying first class. You scanned her pass. Did you even look at it? Did you check her identification?" Arav's smile tightened at the edges. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers in the queue. "Yes, madam. I scanned her pass, and it is valid for first-class travel. Everything is in order." "In order?" Eleanor's voice rose, attracting more attention. "She is probably trafficking something in that shabby backpack. Did you search it? People like her are experts at finding loopholes. She likely has a fake pass, or she's an employee trying to sneak into a premium cabin she hasn't paid for. It's a security risk." The accusation, baseless and venomous, hung in the air. Maya turned around, her serene expression finally faltering, replaced by a look of weary disbelief. She could feel the stares of a dozen strangers, some curious, some sympathetic, some sharing Eleanor's suspicion. "Madam," Arav said, his tone firmer now, "making such accusations is not appropriate. Miss Sinclair is a legitimate passenger. I have verified her ticket and her identity. Now, if you would please proceed down the jet bridge, you are holding up the line." "I will not be dismissed," Eleanor declared, planting her feet. "I pay over £10,000 for my ticket. I pay for a premium experience, which includes a certain standard of security and exclusivity. I do not pay to be crammed into a metal tube with riffraff. I demand you move her to the economy cabin where she belongs. I'm sure you can find a seat for her at the back. The very back." The sheer entitlement of the demand was breathtaking. Maya took a deep breath, clutching the strap of her backpack. She decided to intervene. "Ma'am," Maya said, her voice calm and even, a stark contrast to Eleanor's shrill anger. "There's no mistake. This is my seat. I'm sorry if my presence is bothering you, but the airline has confirmed my ticket." Eleanor whirled around to face her, her eyes blazing with fury. "You! Don't you dare speak to me. You have no right. You probably don't even have a passport that's not forged." "That's enough," Arav said, his voice now carrying a clear note of authority. He stepped out from behind the podium. "Ma'am, you are causing a disturbance. You have two choices. You can either board the plane quietly, or we can deny you boarding altogether for harassing another passenger. The choice is yours." The threat of being denied boarding, of missing her crucial meeting, finally pierced through Eleanor's self-righteous rage. The idea was so preposterous it was almost laughable. But the look in the agent's eyes was deadly serious. The airline staff, usually so fawning and deferential, were siding with the girl in the sweatsuit. The world had truly gone mad. Eleanor shot a look of pure hatred at Maya, then another at Arav. With a contemptuous sniff, she turned on her heel and stalked down the jet bridge, her expensive shoes clicking angrily on the metal floor. "This is not over," she muttered under her breath. "I will be filing a formal complaint. I will have your job." Arav sighed and turned to Maya. "I am so sorry you had to experience that, Miss Sinclair." "It's not your fault," Maya said, giving him a small, grateful smile. "Thank you for handling that so professionally." "It's my job," he replied, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Please go ahead. Enjoy your flight." As Maya walked down the jet bridge, she could feel her heart still pounding from the confrontation. It wasn't the first time she'd been treated this way, but the public nature of it, the sheer, unadulterated venom in the woman's voice, had shaken her. She took a few deep breaths, trying to center herself before she got on the plane. "Don't let her win," she told herself. "Don't let her ruin this." She stepped onto the aircraft and was greeted by a flight attendant. "Good morning, welcome aboard. May I see your boarding pass?" Maya showed her phone. "Of course, seat 2A. Right this way, Miss Sinclair. First suite on your left." The attendant guided her into the exclusive enclave of the first-class cabin. It was a world of hushed tones, muted lighting, and individual suites that offered privacy and luxury. and sitting in seat 2K directly across the aisle was Eleanor Vance. She was in the process of arranging her belongings, but she froze when she saw Maya. Her face, already a mask of fury, contorted into a look of utter disbelief and revulsion. It was as if her worst nightmare had just walked into the cabin. Maya met her gaze, held it for a moment, and then turned her attention to her own suite. She slid her backpack into the overhead compartment and settled into the plush cream leather seat. She could feel Eleanor's eyes boring into her, a palpable wave of hostility radiating across the aisle. The dream flight to see her father was quickly turning into a test of endurance. Eleanor was not going to let this go. Maya knew with a sinking feeling that the drama was far from over. This was just the beginning. The cabin door hissed shut, sealing the first-class passengers in their gilded cage. Eleanor Vance felt a sense of claustrophobic rage. She was trapped for 8 hours in an enclosed space with the very person who represented everything she disdained. The girl, Sinclair, as the insolent gate agent had called her, was calmly fastening her seatbelt, seemingly unfazed by the toxic atmosphere Eleanor was deliberately cultivating. A flight attendant approached Eleanor's suite. He was a man in his late 40s, with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that suggested years of dealing with difficult passengers. His name tag read David. "Miss Vance, welcome aboard," he said warmly. "May I get you a pre-departure beverage? Some more of the Bollinger, perhaps?" "What I want," Eleanor said, her voice low and menacing, "is an explanation." David's smile remained pleasantly neutral. "An explanation, madam?" "Do not play dumb with me," she seethed, gesturing with her head towards Maya's suite. "I want to know how she is in this cabin. I made my concerns perfectly clear in the lounge and at the gate. This is a disgrace to your airline. I am a Gold Card member, a loyal customer for over 20 years. My comfort and security should be your paramount concern." "We appreciate your loyalty immensely, Miss Vance," David said, his tone impeccably smooth. As the ground staff explained, Miss Sinclair is a fully ticketed first-class passenger. I can assure you, she poses no security risk. "Her very presence is a risk to my peace of mind," Eleanor retorted, her voice rising again. Several other passengers, including a Japanese businessman and a quietly famous actress, glanced over, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and curiosity. "Look at her. She's probably documenting this entire cabin on her little phone to sell to the tabloids. Or worse." Across the aisle, Maya could hear every word. She closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on the hum of the engines. She had promised herself she wouldn't let this woman get to her. She pulled out a book from her backpack, a worn paperback copy of The Three-Body Problem. "I demand to be moved," Eleanor insisted. "Find me another seat, away from her." David surveyed the cabin. "I'm afraid we are completely full in first class today, Miss Vance. There are no other seats available." "Then move her," she snapped. "Downgrade her. I will not sit here being stared at by this interloper." It was the word interloper that finally made Maya look up. She met Eleanor's furious gaze with a look of calm, almost pitying steadiness. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her silence, her refusal to be provoked, seemed to infuriate Eleanor more than any argument could have. David stepped slightly into the aisle, creating a subtle barrier between the two women. "Madam," he said to Eleanor, his voice still quiet but now with an edge of steel, "we do not downgrade passengers who have paid for their ticket and have done nothing wrong. My final offer is another glass of champagne. I suggest you take it, settle in, and try to enjoy the flight. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I will be forced to report it to the captain." Eleanor stared at him aghast. She was being managed, handled, like an unruly child. The humiliation was immense. She, Eleanor Vance, was being told to behave. She slumped back in her seat, defeated for the moment but simmering with a fury that was reaching a boiling point. "Fine," she hissed. "Bring me the champagne, a full bottle." David nodded. "Of course, Miss Vance." He then turned and walked directly to Maya's suite. Eleanor watched, her eyes narrowed, expecting him to offer a similar placation. But the interaction was different. "Miss Sinclair," David said, his voice softer, imbued with a deference that was entirely absent from his conversation with Eleanor. "I am so very sorry for that unpleasantness. Please let me know if there is anything at all I can do to make your journey more comfortable. Can I get you anything before we take off? A glass of water? Orange juice?" "Water would be lovely, thank you, David," Maya replied, giving him a genuine warm smile. "And really don't worry, you're handling it perfectly." "It is my pleasure," he said, and his words seemed to carry a weight beyond mere professional courtesy. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible bow of his head before retreating to the galley. Eleanor saw it all. The shift in tone, the respectful address, the bow. It was a small thing, a nuance that most would miss. But to a woman like Eleanor, who lived and breathed the subtle language of power and status, it was a glaring anomaly. Flight attendants were polite to everyone, but they were deferential to the truly important. Why would a senior crew member show such marked respect to a girl in a sweatsuit? The seed of doubt planted by Julian in the lounge began to sprout. The Silicon Valley types. No, that wasn't it. This was different. There was something more going on here, something she couldn't yet understand. As the plane began its powerful ascent, pushing passengers back into their seats, Eleanor stewed in a cocktail of rage and a new, unsettling emotion. Confusion. She watched as Maya accepted her bottle of water from David, thanking him quietly. She watched as the girl opened her book and began to read, seemingly lost in its pages, as if she were completely alone in her own private library. Her composure was unnatural. Her calm was unnerving. Eleanor took a long swallow of her champagne. The alcohol did little to calm her nerves. For the first time that day, she felt a flicker of uncertainty. She had built her career on her ability to read people, to assess their value, their weaknesses, their place in the hierarchy. But this girl was an enigma, and Eleanor Vance hated nothing more than a puzzle she couldn't solve. Her campaign of intimidation had failed. Now she was left with a growing sense of unease, a feeling that she had made a terrible, terrible miscalculation. The turbulence she was feeling had nothing to do with the air outside and everything to do with the quiet, unassuming young woman in seat 2A. An hour into the flight, the rhythm of transatlantic travel had settled in. The cabin was quiet, save for the gentle roar of the engines. Lunch service had concluded, and most passengers were either watching films on their private screens or dozing under plush duvets. Maya was still engrossed in her book, a pair of noise-canceling headphones on, shutting out the world. Eleanor, however, could not relax. She had barely touched her pan-seared sea bass. The champagne had only sharpened the edges of her anger and anxiety. She found herself surreptitiously watching Maya, trying to decipher the mystery. She noted the way Maya interacted with the crew, with a quiet, unassuming politeness that they returned with an unusual level of attentiveness. It wasn't just David. The entire first-class crew seemed to be orbiting her, anticipating her needs before she even voiced them. Eleanor's mind raced through possibilities. Was she a celebrity flying incognito? No, Eleanor prided herself on knowing the faces that mattered, and this girl was not one of them. A diplomat's daughter? Perhaps. But there was an ease about her, an unpretentious air that didn't quite fit with the stiff formality of diplomatic families. The puzzle was maddening. Eleanor's entire worldview was predicated on a clear, visible hierarchy. People displayed their status through their clothes, their watches, their mannerisms. Maya Sinclair defied all of her metrics. She was an error in the system, a piece that didn't fit, and it was driving Eleanor to distraction. Suddenly, there was a quiet commotion at the front of the cabin. Two men, who had been sitting in the very first row, stood up. They were both in their late 50s, dressed in impeccably tailored navy blue suits. They had an aura of authority that was unmistakable, the quiet, confident bearing of men who were used to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. Eleanor recognized their type instantly. They were C-suite. She watched, intrigued, as they didn't head towards the lavatory or the galley. Instead, they walked purposefully down the aisle and stopped directly at Maya's suite. Maya looked up from her book, a flicker of surprise in her eyes as she saw them. She removed her headphones. "Mr. Harrison, Mr. Chen," she said, her voice clear and professional. "I didn't realize you were on this flight." The taller of the two men, a distinguished-looking man with silver at his temples, smiled warmly. "Maya, good to see you. We were up front. Your father mentioned you were flying back today, but we didn't want to disturb you earlier. We trust the crew has been looking after you?" "They've been wonderful, thank you, Robert," Maya replied. Eleanor's blood ran cold. "Robert?" He was addressing her by her first name. Robert Harrison was the chief financial officer of this very airline. Eleanor knew this because she had spent the last 3 months studying the company's entire leadership team in preparation for her pitch. The other man, Thomas Chen, was the head of international strategy. They were two of the most powerful men in the company, and they were speaking to the girl in the sweatsuit as if she were an equal. "We just wanted to go over the preliminary numbers for the Q3 route expansion initiative before we land in New York," Thomas Chen said, holding a slim tablet. "Your analysis of the Lagos-Atlanta corridor was particularly insightful. It's caused quite a stir in planning." "I just pointed out what the data was already showing," Maya said modestly. The existing models were underweighting the growth in the West African business and tourism sectors. The potential passenger yield is significantly higher than projected. Harrison chuckled. "A potential that could be worth an extra $200 million in annual revenue. You're pointing it out. Has the board reevaluating our entire 5-year plan for the Americas?" Eleanor felt as if the air had been sucked out of the cabin. She was frozen, her glass of champagne halfway to her lips. She was listening to a high-level strategic discussion, the kind that determined the fate of empires, being held in the middle of the first-class aisle. And the girl in the Nikes was not just participating, she was at the center of it. "We've run the revised projections," Chen said, tapping on his tablet. "If we can secure the landing slots at Hartsfield-Jackson, the ROI is even better than we hoped. We're fast-tracking the proposal for the next board meeting." "That's fantastic news," Maya said, her face lighting up with genuine excitement. "It's the right move for the company. It diversifies our portfolio away from the oversaturated European markets." The exchange lasted for another 5 minutes. They discussed aircraft allocation, marketing budgets, and regulatory hurdles. Maya spoke with a quiet confidence and a depth of knowledge that was staggering. She wasn't just regurgitating information. She was analyzing, synthesizing, and offering strategic insights that the two executives were clearly taking very seriously. Across the aisle, Eleanor Vance was undergoing a transformation. Her arrogance, so solid and unshakable just moments before, was cracking. The crack spiderwebbed through her certainty, shattering it into a million pieces. The contempt she had felt was being rapidly replaced by a new, terrifying emotion. Dread. A cold, heavy stone of dread was sinking in her stomach. She had made a mistake. A catastrophic, career-ending mistake. She replayed the events of the day in her mind with horrifying clarity. The sneering comments in the lounge, the public humiliation at the gate, the venomous demands in the cabin. She had not just insulted a fellow passenger. She had harassed, belittled, and racially profiled someone who was intimately, powerfully connected to the very company she was desperate to do business with. The two executives finished their conversation. "We'll let you get back to your book," Harrison said with another warm smile. "We'll see you at the meeting on Friday." "See you Friday," Maya confirmed. As they turned to leave, Robert Harrison's eyes swept across the aisle and landed on Eleanor. His expression shifted. The warmth vanished, replaced by a look of cold recognition. He knew who she was. He took a step towards her suite. Thomas Chen followed, his face unreadable. The two most powerful men in the airline were now standing before her, and Eleanor Vance suddenly felt very, very small. The hunter had become the prey. Robert Harrison stood before Eleanor's suite, his face a mask of cool disappointment. The friendly CFO who had been chatting about revenue projections moments before was gone, replaced by a formidable corporate titan. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice calm but laced with an unmistakable chill. "Eleanor Vance, of Vance and Sterling. I recognize you from the dossier for the upcoming consulting proposals." Eleanor's mouth went dry. The word dossier sounded ominous, clinical. She felt like a specimen under a microscope. She tried to compose herself, to salvage some shred of her formidable persona. "Mr. Harrison, yes. An honor to meet you in person before our final presentation." Her voice was strained, a pathetic imitation of her usual confident tone. "Indeed," Harrison said, his eyes flicking for a fraction of a second towards Maya, then back to Eleanor. "My colleague David, the cabin service director, made a full report to the captain about a disturbance shortly after takeoff, a report which included your name and some rather troubling complaints you made. The captain in turn forwarded that report to us as per company protocol when it involves high-value contract bidders." Every word was a nail being hammered into her professional coffin. Protocol, report, disturbance. The corporate jargon she used to wield as a weapon was now being turned against her with lethal precision. Thomas Chen, the head of strategy, spoke for the first time, his voice soft but cutting. "Your firm's proposal was, on paper, very impressive, Miss Vance. You speak a great deal about improving corporate culture and brand synergy. Lofty ideals." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "It seems, however, there is a significant disconnect between the ideals you sell and the values you practice." Eleanor's face, which had been pale with dread, now began to flush with the hot shame of exposure. She opened her mouth to speak, to defend herself, to explain, but Harrison held up a hand, silencing her instantly. "Before you say anything," he said, "I think a formal introduction is in order. You've been sharing a cabin for several hours, after all." He turned slightly, gesturing across the aisle to the young woman who was now watching the scene unfold with a quiet, somber expression. The book lay forgotten in her lap. "Miss Vance," Robert Harrison said, his voice ringing with a clarity that seemed to fill the entire cabin, "I'd like to formally introduce you to Maya Sinclair." He paused for effect, letting the name settle. Eleanor's mind scrambled. Sinclair. Sinclair. Why is that name so important? And then, like a bolt of lightning, the connection was made. The CEO of the airline, the man who held the final decision on her multi-million-pound contract, the man whose name was on the letterhead of the very company she was flying with, was Sir James Sinclair. Her face must have betrayed her horrified realization, because a flicker of grim satisfaction crossed Thomas Chen's face. Harrison delivered the final, devastating blow. "Maya is our CEO's daughter," he stated simply. "She has just completed a 2-year internship program, working across all our major international hubs, from baggage handling in Dubai to marketing in Singapore, and most recently, route analytics in Nairobi. She's not just the CEO's daughter. She's one of the brightest young minds in our company. The Lagos Atlanta initiative was her brainchild." Eleanor felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The world tilted on its axis. The girl in the sweatsuit. The girl she had called riffraff and an interloper. The girl she had accused of being a criminal. She wasn't just connected. She was the connection, the direct line to the throne. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, his voice relentless, "Maya is also the newly appointed co-chair of our board's new Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force. Her primary mandate is to identify and rectify the very kind of behavior you have so publicly demonstrated today." The irony was so thick, so suffocating, it was almost comical. Eleanor had not only insulted the boss's daughter, she had provided a perfect, real-time case study for the exact initiative that young woman was leading. She had personally embodied the problem her company was being hired to solve. Eleanor turned her head slowly, her movements stiff, robotic. She looked at Maya. She saw not a defiant girl, but a poised and powerful young woman looking back at her, not with anger, but with a profound, soul-crushing disappointment. The polite smile she had offered in the lounge now seemed like a gesture of immense grace from a superior being she had been too blind and arrogant to recognize. The full weight of her actions crashed down on her. The lost contract was just the beginning. The reputational damage would be catastrophic. Word of this would spread. She had built a career on being a shark, but she had just tried to take a bite out of the shark's own child. She finally found her voice, but it was a pathetic, strangled whisper. I had no idea. Maya spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but resonating with absolute authority. That, she said, cutting through the silence, is precisely the problem. You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with basic human decency. Maya's words struck Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me with basic human decency. The simple, irrefutable truth of it stripped away every possible excuse, every potential defense. It laid bare the ugliness of her prejudice. Her behavior hadn't been a mistake based on a misunderstanding. It had been a choice based on a worldview that judged people's worth by their cover. Eleanor's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. The imperious titan of industry vanished, replaced by a desperate, panicked woman on the verge of ruin. "Miss Sinclair," she stammered, her voice trembling as she half rose from her seat. "Please, I am so terribly sorry. It was a misunderstanding. I was stressed. The flight. I made an assumption, a terrible, unforgivable assumption. Please, you must accept my apology." Her apology was a frantic, fumbling mess directed not at the person she had wronged, but at the power she now recognized. It was an appeal, not an act of contrition. Maya held up a hand, and the simple gesture had the power to make Eleanor fall silent and sink back into her seat. "Mrs. Vance," Maya said, her voice remaining calm and measured, which was somehow more damning than shouting would have been. "Your apology is not for me to accept or reject. It's irrelevant. This was never about my feelings. I've been dealing with people who look at me the way you do my entire life. I'm fine." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. "This is about your character. It's about who you are when you think no one of consequence is watching. And today, we all saw it." She gestured subtly to the other passengers, who were now openly staring, and to the flight attendants standing watchfully in the galley. Robert Harrison stepped forward again, reclaiming control of the execution. "As Maya said, this has provided us with a great deal of clarity, Miss Vance. The airline industry is global. We connect people from all walks of life, from every country, every background. Our brand is built on a promise of welcome and respect. Your behavior has been a flagrant violation of everything we stand for." "But my company," Eleanor whispered, the last vestiges of her hope clinging to the contract. "Our proposal is solid. We can help you. We can fix these very issues." Thomas Chen let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Miss Vance, how can you possibly fix a problem you so clearly embody? That would be like hiring an arsonist to lead the fire department. Your actions today have given us the most valuable data point we could have asked for. You've shown us that your firm is fundamentally incompatible with our corporate direction." He looked at his colleague. "Robert, I think we're in agreement?" "Completely," Harrison confirmed. "Miss Vance, you can consider your proposal officially withdrawn from consideration. We will be awarding the contract to the runner-up, a firm that has demonstrated a genuine, long-standing commitment to inclusive practices. My assistant will email you a formal notice before we even land." It was over. The multi-million-pound deal that was meant to be her crowning achievement had evaporated into thin air, right here in the hushed cabin of Flight 117. "Furthermore," Harrison added, his voice dropping to a final, grave tone, "your conduct was not just unprofessional, it bordered on harassment. We have multiple witnesses. Upon landing at JFK, we will have our ground staff escort you to a private room where you will be informed that you are no longer welcome on any of our airline's flights. Your gold card status is revoked, effective immediately. You have been permanently grounded." Permanently grounded. The words echoed in the silent cabin. For a woman like Eleanor, who lived her life in airport lounges and first-class cabins, it was a fate worse than mere financial loss. It was an excommunication, an exile from the world she had fought so hard to dominate. She slumped in her seat, all the fight gone out of her. She looked small, deflated, a hollowed-out version of the formidable woman who had boarded the plane that morning. She stared at her hands, unable to meet anyone's gaze. The quiet judgment of the other passengers, the disappointed stare of the flight crew, and the calm, powerful presence of Maya Sinclair formed an invisible cage around her. Harrison and Chen gave Maya a final respectful nod and returned to their seats. The show was over. For the remaining 6 hours of the flight, Eleanor Vance sat in absolute, crushing silence. She didn't order another drink. She didn't watch a film. She just stared blankly ahead as her world, once so shiny and perfect, lay in smoldering ruins around her. As the plane finally descended into New York, banking over the familiar skyline, Maya looked across the aisle one last time. She felt no triumph, no pleasure in the woman's demise, just a quiet sadness. It was a victory for decency, but a somber reminder of the ugliness that still existed in the world. Her father's words from his text message echoed in her mind. "Don't let anyone give you any trouble." She hadn't. She had simply let the troublemaker create her own, inescapable, hard-hitting karma at 30,000 feet in the air. The touchdown at John F. Kennedy International Airport was smooth, but for Eleanor Vance it felt like a crash landing. The familiar bump of the wheels on the tarmac was a gavel strike, signaling the end of her reign. As the plane taxied towards the gate, the other first-class passengers began to gather their belongings, a quiet buzz of activity filling the cabin. They moved with a practiced ease, but their movements were freighted with a new awareness. They pointedly avoided looking at Eleanor, creating a bubble of social isolation around her seat. She was no longer one of them. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered in the exclusive circles she once dominated. As the seatbelt sign pinged off, David, the cabin service director, appeared at her suite. His expression was professionally blank, devoid of the warmth he'd shown earlier and the contempt she deserved. It was worse. It was indifference. "Miss Vance," he said quietly, "please remain in your seat until all other passengers have deplaned. Our ground staff will be here to assist you." The word assist was a chilling euphemism. Eleanor could only nod, her throat too tight to form words. She watched as Maya Sinclair stood up, retrieved her simple black backpack, and shared a brief, respectful nod with Robert Harrison and Thomas Chen. The three of them walked towards the exit, part of a world that had decisively and permanently ejected her. Just before stepping out, Maya glanced back, her eyes meeting Eleanor's one last time. There was no malice in her gaze, only a deep, resounding finality. Then she was gone. Eleanor sat alone in the silent, empty cabin for what felt like an eternity. The cleaning crew stood waiting respectfully at the galley, their presence a quiet pressure. Finally, two uniformed airline representatives appeared at the door. One was a stern-looking woman with a clipboard. The other, a large, impassive man whose presence was clearly for security. "Miss Eleanor Vance?" the woman asked, though it wasn't a question. "Please come with us." They led her not through the jet bridge into the bustling terminal, but down a set of mobile stairs onto the windswept tarmac. It was the ultimate humiliation, being escorted like a deportee past the massive engines and underbelly of the aircraft. They guided her to an unmarked door and into the sterile, anonymous corridors of the airport's staff-only areas. The private room was small and windowless, furnished with a table and 3 chairs. It felt like an interrogation room. The woman laid the clipboard on the table. "This document," she stated, "is a formal notice of service refusal. It outlines the events of Flight 117. As of this moment, your Gold Card account, number 774-2B9, has been terminated. You are permanently banned from traveling with this airline and all its Star Alliance partners. Any future bookings will be automatically canceled and refunded." She slid a second piece of paper across the table. "This is a non-disclosure agreement. It is strongly recommended you sign it. It ensures your discretion regarding the events of the flight and the identities of the passengers involved. The unspoken threat was clear. Stay quiet, or face a legal battle you cannot possibly win. Eleanor's hand trembled as she picked up the pen. Her signature, once a bold assertion of power on million-pound contracts, was now a shaky scrawl of surrender. She had been comprehensively and systematically erased. As Eleanor was being processed, Maya was in the back of a black car speeding towards Manhattan. She was on the phone with her father. "Hi, Dad," she said, the city lights beginning to streak past her window. "Maya, sweetheart, you landed." Sir James Sinclair's voice was warm and rich, a stark contrast to the cold corporate tones that had condemned Eleanor. "How was the flight? Did the crew look after you?" "The flight was eventful," Maya said with a sigh. "And yes, the crew was incredible, especially David." "Eventful? What happened?" Maya recounted the entire story, from the disdainful looks in the Concorde room to the public confrontation at the gate, the demands in the cabin, and the final devastating revelation. She didn't embellish or editorialize. She just presented the facts, her voice steady. On the other end of the line, there was a long silence. When Sir James finally spoke, his voice had lost its warmth, replaced by a cold fury. "She said what? She accused you of trafficking? In front of the gate agent?" "Dad, it's okay, I'm fine, really. Robert and Thomas handled it." "Handled it? Maya, this isn't just about handling it. This is the core of the rot we're trying to cut out. This woman, Vance, was supposed to be a leader, a consultant we pay a fortune to tell us how to be better. And this is her true face. Thank God you were there. You were the perfect litmus test." He paused. "I've just received the formal report from Harrison. Banning her was the only option. We can't have people like that representing or associating with our brand. But more importantly, I'm sorry you had to be the one to endure it." "Don't be," Maya said firmly. "In a way, I'm glad it happened. It wasn't an abstract case study in a diversity seminar. It was real. It reminded me exactly why the DEI task force is so important. It's not about quotas or PR. It's about basic human dignity. It's about ensuring that every single person who steps into our lounges or onto our planes feels welcome and respected, whether they're wearing a Savile Row suit or a simple sweatsuit." She looked out at the glittering New York skyline. Mrs. Vance thought power was about the clothes you wear, the money you have, the authority you can project. She was wrong. Real power is making sure the quietest voice in the room is heard. It's building a culture where a gate agent like Arav feels empowered to do the right thing, even when faced with a belligerent high-status passenger. Sir James was quiet for a moment, the sound of his pride palpable even over the phone. "You've learned that lesson well, Maya. You're ready. You're more than ready." The conversation shifted to plans for dinner, but the weight of the day's events lingered. Maya knew the story of Eleanor Vance would become a quiet legend within the airline, a cautionary tale for anyone who believed their status put them above decency. Her fall from grace wasn't loud or explosive. It was a quiet, efficient, and total dismantling of her world. It was the modern way of justice. Eleanor Vance eventually left the airport through a side exit, her Hermes bag feeling like a ludicrously heavy burden. She caught a yellow cab, the vinyl seats sticking to her expensive suit. As the taxi merged into the chaotic New York traffic, she was just another face in the crowd, stripped of her privilege, her status, her future. She was, for the first time in decades, truly grounded. She had spent her life flying above everyone else, only to learn, in the most brutal way possible, that the higher you climb, the harder you fall, and that sometimes the most powerful person on the plane isn't the one in the most expensive suit, but the one with the quiet confidence to know their own worth, regardless of what anyone else thinks. And so, Eleanor Vance learned the hardest lesson of her life, that true status has nothing to do with the price of your ticket or the brand of your handbag. It's about how you treat people when you think their status is lower than yours. Her prejudice didn't just cost her a contract, it cost her the privileged world she worshipped. Karma, delivered in the most direct and public way imaginable. What did you think of Eleanor's instant regret? Was it a lesson learned or just the fear of getting caught? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. If you believe that character is more important than class and that karma always finds its address, make sure you hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable tales of drama and justice. We'll see you in the next one. What happens when you judge a book by its cover? You're about to find out. In a world of privilege and power, one woman's prejudice is about to ignite a firestorm at 30,000 feet. You'll witness the moment a successful black woman is publicly shamed, denied her rightful place, and threatened with removal from a flight. But you will also be there for the shocking twist that no one saw coming. A twist that involves a powerful CEO, a hidden identity, and a cascade of karma so devastating it will dismantle an entire empire. Stay with us for a story of injustice, identity, and the epic downfall that follows when you underestimate the wrong person. The hum of John F. Kennedy International Airport was a familiar symphony to Amara Sterling. It was a chaotic orchestra of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and 1,000 overlapping conversations in a dozen languages. A sound she associated with progress, with movement, with the relentless forward march of her own life. At 28, Amara was the lead architect at Ethelred & Locke, a firm so prestigious its name was spoken in hushed, reverent tones in the boardrooms of global corporations. She hadn't just earned a seat at the table. She had designed the table, drafted the blueprints for its construction, and chosen the sustainable, ethically sourced mahogany it was built from. Today, she was flying from JFK to London Heathrow on Global Airways Flight 110. It wasn't a vacation. It was the culmination of 18 months of sleepless nights, caffeine-fueled creativity, and navigating the treacherous waters of corporate politics. She was on her way to present the final phase of the Phoenix Project, a revolutionary carbon-neutral skyscraper set to redefine the London skyline, to a consortium of investors. Her name was already a whisper of legend in the industry, and this project would make it a roar. Her ticket was, naturally, first class. It was a non-negotiable part of her contract, a practical necessity for arriving rested and sharp after a 7-hour flight, ready to command a room of billionaires. Her attire was a reflection of her professional ethos, understated, elegant, and powerful. A tailored blazer in a deep burgundy, a simple silk shell, and trousers that fell with the perfect line to her polished loafers. Her hair was styled in intricate goddess braids, adorned with a few delicate gold cuffs that caught the light. In her hand she carried a slim leather portfolio containing the work that was her passion and her purpose. After gliding through the serene efficiency of the Global Airways Stratosphere Lounge, with its hushed atmosphere and complimentary champagne, Amara boarded the aircraft. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 777 was an oasis of calm and muted luxury. The pods were sculpted in shades of cream and silver, each a private sanctuary of leather and brushed metal. Amara found her seat, 2A, a window seat at the front of the cabin. She slid her portfolio into the literature pocket, settled into the plush leather, and took a deep, centering breath. She had this. The boarding process continued, a quiet parade of the privileged. Businessmen in crisp suits loosened their ties. A famous actress hid behind oversized sunglasses, and a wealthy couple bickered softly about their connecting flight to Monaco. Amara paid them little mind, focusing on her pre-flight ritual, reviewing her presentation notes on her tablet one last time. Then, the atmosphere shifted. The change was heralded by a voice, sharp and imperious, that cut through the cabin's tranquility like a shard of glass. Excuse me. I think there has been a mistake." Amara looked up from her tablet. Standing in the aisle was a woman who looked to be in her late 60s. She was impeccably dressed in a Chanel tweed suit that probably cost more than a small car. Her face a mask of carefully maintained preservation, her silver blonde hair coiffed into a helmet of perfection. Every inch of her screamed old money and an unshakable belief in her own superiority. This was Eleanor Williams. Her piercing blue eyes were fixed with laser-like intensity on Amara. "I believe you're in my seat," Eleanor stated. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. Amara offered a polite, neutral smile. She was used to navigating microaggressions, the subtle and not-so-subtle challenges to her presence in spaces like this. "I don't believe so," she said, her voice calm and even. "My boarding pass is for seat 2A. Eleanor Williams sniffed, a sound of profound disdain. "That's impossible. I'm always in 2A. My assistant has standing instructions." She didn't even glance at the seat number next to her own pod, 2B. Her focus was entirely and pointedly on Amara. A flight attendant, a young man named Mark with an eager-to-please smile plastered on his face, scurried over. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Williams?" he asked, his tone immediately deferential. He recognized her. "Yes, Mark," Eleanor said, gesturing a manicured hand towards Amara. "This person is in my seat. You need to move her." The use of the word her instead of this passenger was not lost on Amara. She felt a familiar, weary tightening in her chest, but her expression remained a carefully constructed wall of placidity. Mark turned to Amara, his professional smile faltering slightly as he took in the scene. He was caught between a high-value, notoriously difficult regular and a passenger he didn't know. He chose the path of least resistance. "Ma'am, could I please see your boarding pass?" he asked Amara. "Of course," Amara said, pulling up the digital pass on her phone and holding it out for him. Mark glanced at it, then back at Eleanor. "Mrs. Williams, it seems this passenger is indeed assigned to 2A. Your seat is 2B right here." Eleanor looked at seat 2B as if it were infested with vermin. "No, that is unacceptable. I require a window seat. There must be a mistake in your system." She then turned her gaze back to Amara, her eyes narrowing. "How did you even get this ticket? Did you use points? Sometimes the system gives priority to Diamond Medallion members when they use points to upgrade people." The insinuation was clear. "You couldn't have possibly paid for this. You don't belong here." Amara's calm began to fray at the edges, but she held on. "I'm a revenue-paying passenger just like you," she stated, her voice a little colder now. "This is my assigned seat." "We'll see about that," Eleanor muttered. She turned back to Mark, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, loud enough for Amara and the surrounding passengers to hear. "Check her ticket again. I've seen this before. People forge these things, or they get them through some third-party discount site. It's probably not even valid. The scanner must have made an error." Mark, clearly intimidated and flustered, looked at Amara with a new, unwelcome suspicion in his eyes. The seed of doubt Eleanor had planted was taking root. The other passengers were now openly staring, their quiet conversation ceasing. The cabin had become a theater, and Amara was the unwilling star of a humiliating play. "Ma'am," Mark said to Amara, his tone now lacking its earlier politeness. It was now the voice of a bouncer, not a host. "I'm going to need to see your pass again, and your identification." Amara felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp. To be questioned, to have her legitimacy challenged in front of an audience was degrading. But she knew that reacting with anger would only play into the stereotype Eleanor was painting of her. She had to be better. She had to be smarter. She had to be infinitely more patient than the situation deserved. With deliberate, almost slow-motion precision, she opened her purse, retrieved her passport, and handed it along with her phone to the flight attendant. "Here is my boarding pass for seat 2A and my passport, Amara Sterling. Both are quite valid. Perhaps you should check Mrs. Williams's boarding pass to confirm she is in the correct seat." Mark took the documents, but his focus was on placating Eleanor. He barely glanced at Amara's passport. "Mrs. Williams, please, if you would just take your seat for a moment, I will sort this all out." "Sort it out by moving her to the back of the plane where she belongs," Eleanor snapped, finally casting a venomous glare at Amara. "People can't just come in here and take whatever they want." The thin veneer of civility had cracked, revealing the raw, ugly prejudice beneath. It was no longer about a seat. It was about Amara's presence. Every passenger in the cabin knew it. The air crackled with tension. Amara simply met Eleanor's gaze, her eyes steady and unblinking, a silent refusal to be broken. But inside, the calm was gone, replaced by a gathering storm of fury and humiliation that was about to break. And the flight attendant, Mark, was about to make the worst decision of his career. Mark, the flight attendant, was sweating. His crisp white collar suddenly felt like a noose. On one side was Eleanor Williams, a woman who flew this route monthly and was known for her lengthy, detailed complaints to corporate if the champagne wasn't chilled to her precise liking. On the other was a silent, poised black woman who, despite her calm demeanor, radiated an intimidating aura of intelligence. In Mark's simple calculus of risk, Eleanor was the known and immediate threat. "Ma'am," he said, turning his back slightly on Eleanor to face Amara, creating a physical alliance. "There seems to be some confusion. I understand your pass says 2A, but Mrs. Williams is one of our most valued customers, and we have to consider the possibility of a system glitch." Amara's eyebrows rose. A system glitch? Or the simple fact that you are unwilling to tell this woman to sit in her assigned seat? Her voice was dangerously quiet. "You've seen my pass. You've seen my passport. What more sorting out is there to do?" "Now there's no need to take that tone," Mark said, puffing his chest out slightly, a flimsy shield of authority. He was taking his cues from Eleanor, who watched with a look of smug satisfaction. "I'll take whatever tone I deem necessary when I'm being publicly accused of forgery and treated like a criminal," Amara retorted, the ice in her voice now sharp enough to cut. "Do your job. Tell Mrs. Williams to go to seat 2B and we can all get on with our day." Eleanor gasped dramatically. "The nerve, Mark. Are you going to let her speak to me that way? To you that way? This is harassment. I feel unsafe." This was the magic word. Unsafe. It was the key that unlocked a new level of procedural power for the flight crew. Mark seized it like a life raft. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now firm and official, addressing Amara. "Your aggressive behavior is creating a disturbance. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings. We may need to deplane you to resolve this situation." The cabin fell into a shocked silence. The threat was so disproportionate, so blatantly unjust, that it hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Amara felt a disorienting wave of disbelief, followed by a cold, hard rage. They were going to remove her? Because she had calmly defended her right to exist in a space she had paid for? Because she had refused to meekly accept a baseless accusation? "You can't be serious," Amara said, her voice low and trembling with controlled fury. "You are going to remove a paying passenger from her rightful seat because another passenger is throwing a tantrum?" "It's for the safety and comfort of everyone on board," Mark recited, the words sounding hollow and rehearsed. "If you don't cooperate, I'll have to call the gate agent and airport security." Amara looked around the cabin. She saw a few faces showing sympathy, a few showing discomfort, but most were staring resolutely into their laps or out the windows, desperate not to get involved. Their silence was a form of complicity, another layer to her humiliation. She felt utterly alone. "Fine," Amara said, her jaw tight. She would not give them the satisfaction of a scene. She would not cry or scream. She would be the epitome of dignity as they marched her off the plane in disgrace. She reached for her portfolio. "Let me be clear. You are removing me, Amara Sterling, from Global Airways Flight 110, Seat 2A against my will and without cause. I will be taking this up with your corporate office. You can be assured of that." "I'm sure you will," Eleanor sneered from the aisle, folding her arms in triumph. Mark took a step back, ready to escort Amara off the plane. The battle was over. The entitled worldview of Eleanor Williams had won. But then a new voice entered the fray. It was quiet, yet it carried an effortless authority that sliced through the tension and made every head turn. "That won't be necessary." A man had emerged from the cockpit area, where he had seemingly been speaking with the pilots. He was in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a face that was both kind and formidably intelligent. He was dressed simply in a gray cashmere sweater and dark trousers, looking more like a university professor than a businessman. He had been standing there for the last few moments, observing the entire interaction with an expression of deepening horror. Mark, the flight attendant, visibly flinched. He recognized the man instantly, not from a passenger manifest, but from the cover of the airline's in-flight magazine and from every corporate training video. His blood ran cold. It was Richard Sterling, the founder and chief executive officer of Global Airways. Richard's eyes, the same intelligent, deep-set eyes as Amara's, swept over the scene. They rested on Mark's terrified face, then on Eleanor Williams's smug one, and finally, they softened with an aching sadness as they met Amara's. He took a step forward into the tense tableau of the first-class cabin. He walked past the gawking passengers, past the triumphant Eleanor, and past the petrified flight attendant. He walked directly to seat 2A and stopped. He placed a gentle hand on Amara's shoulder. He looked directly at Mark, his voice devoid of heat but heavy with a terrible final weight. "What seems to be the problem here, Mark?" Mark stammered, his face ashen. "Mr. Sterling, sir, There was a seating discrepancy. This passenger was being disruptive." Richard's gaze was unyielding. A seating discrepancy. Or was Mrs. Williams a woman known for her particularities, making baseless accusations? And were you, a member of my crew, about to remove a passenger from her confirmed paid-for seat to appease her? Eleanor, who hadn't yet grasped the full gravity of the situation, decided to intervene. "Richard, thank goodness you're here," she said, her voice oozing familiarity. "You must do something about this. This woman was being utterly abusive." Richard Sterling turned his head slowly to look at Eleanor Williams. His expression was one of profound disappointment. Abusive Eleanor? Or was she simply refusing to be intimidated? He then looked back at Mark, his eyes flashing with a cold fire that made the young man shrink. He gestured towards Amara, who was watching the scene unfold with a stunned, dawning realization. Richard Sterling let the silence hang for a beat, ensuring he had the undivided attention of every single person in the cabin. Then he delivered the words that would shatter Eleanor's world and end Mark's career. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice resonating with a quiet, paternal fury. "That's my daughter." The 4 words dropped into the pressurized cabin like a neutron bomb, sucking all the sound and air out of the space. "That's my daughter." If Amara had felt the eyes of the other passengers on her before, it was nothing compared to the intense, whiplash-inducing stare of every person now. The actress's sunglasses were down. The bickering couple were silent. Every face was a mask of pure shock. Mark, the flight attendant, looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His face, already pale, turned a ghostly white. A small, strangled sound escaped his lips, a pathetic mix of a gasp and a whimper. He looked from the CEO's stony face to Amara's dignified one, the family resemblance suddenly, painfully obvious in the shared set of their jaws and the intelligence in their eyes. The floor of the Boeing 777 seemed to have vanished beneath his feet, but the most spectacular reaction belonged to Eleanor Williams. The smug, triumphant smirk on her face didn't just disappear, it shattered, replaced by a slack-jawed, fish-like gape. Her carefully applied foundation couldn't hide the blood draining from her face. Her mind, so quick to make prejudiced assumptions, struggled to process the new reality. The young black woman she had belittled, accused, and tried to have ejected was the daughter of Richard Sterling. The Richard Sterling, the man whose airline she was currently standing in. It was a social and tactical error of such catastrophic proportions that her brain simply short-circuited. Richard ignored them both for a moment. His focus was entirely on Amara. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his voice full of a father's concern that overrode the CEO's fury. Amara, who had weathered the entire ordeal with a steel spine, finally felt a tremor of emotion break through her composure. It wasn't weakness, but relief. The profound, bone-deep relief of being seen, of being validated, of no longer having to fight the battle alone. A single crystalline tear escaped and traced a silent path down her cheek. She simply nodded, unable to trust her voice. Richard gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze, a silent promise that he would handle everything. Then he straightened up and turned, his demeanor shifting back to that of the man in charge of a multi-billion-dollar airline. His gaze fell upon Mark. "Mark," he began, his voice dangerously calm. "In your training, do you recall the section on our guiding principles?" Yes, sir," Mark stammered. "And what is the very first principle?" To treat every person with dignity and respect, sir." "Dignity and respect," Richard repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "Yet I have just witnessed you treat a passenger with suspicion, condescension, and the threat of removal, all based on the prejudiced complaints of another passenger. You failed to de-escalate. You failed to verify the facts impartially. You failed to defend a customer who was in the right. You sided with a bully because you perceived her to have more social capital. In doing so, you not only humiliated my daughter, you humiliated this airline. You betrayed the very core of our brand." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet, surgical precision of his words was far more devastating. "Gather your things. A gate agent will meet you. You will be escorted from the airport. Your employment with Global Airways is terminated, effective immediately. Human Resources will be in contact regarding your final paycheck. Do you understand?" Mark could only nod, his eyes wide with terror. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life burn down in front of him. Without another word, he turned and practically fled towards the galley, a man stripped of his pride and his job in the space of 90 seconds. Richard then turned his cool, assessing gaze to Eleanor Williams. She had managed to close her mouth, but the color had not returned to her face. She was frantically trying to recalibrate, to find a foothold in this new, horrifying landscape. "Richard," she began, her voice a strained, sycophantic whisper. "Richard, I am mortified. Absolutely mortified. I had no idea. She is a lovely girl. There was just a simple misunderstanding about the seat." Richard held up a hand, silencing her instantly. "There was no misunderstanding, Eleanor," he said, his voice laced with contempt. "There was prejudice, there was entitlement, and there was cruelty. You saw a young black woman in a seat you coveted, and you decided she didn't belong. You used your perceived status to bully my employee into harassing her. You are everything I despise and everything I have fought to ensure this airline does not represent." He paused, letting the weight of his condemnation settle on her. "My daughter," he continued, his voice swelling with pride as he glanced back at Amara, "is Amara Sterling. She is one of the most brilliant architects of her generation. She is flying to London to oversee a project that will be a landmark of sustainable innovation for the next century. She earned her place in this seat, and in this world through talent and relentless hard work. Something you, it seems, have forgotten how to recognize, let alone respect." His gaze hardened. "Your presence on this aircraft is no longer welcome. The lead flight attendant will arrange for your luggage to be removed. You will be deplaned immediately." Eleanor's eyes widened in horror. "You can't. My meeting in London, it's vital." "It seems you should have considered that before you chose to behave abominably," Richard replied coolly. "Furthermore, as of this moment you are banned from flying with Global Airways, for life. Any future tickets you have purchased will be cancelled and refunded. Our legal team will be in touch to formalize your persona non grata status. Now please leave my aircraft." He turned his back on her completely, a final, brutal dismissal. Another flight attendant, the lead for the cabin, a poised woman who had watched the scene with professional dismay, stepped forward. "Mrs. Williams, this way, please." Humiliated, defeated, and utterly exposed, Eleanor Williams, for the first time in what was likely decades, did as she was told. She stumbled away, a fallen queen being escorted from her usurped throne. The silence that followed her departure was absolute, broken only by the quiet click of the cabin door closing. Richard Sterling let out a long, slow breath and turned back to Amara. The CEO was gone, and only the father remained. He sat down in the now vacant seat 2B, his face etched with pain. "I'm so sorry, Amara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry you had to go through that." Amara finally gave him a small, watery smile. "It's okay, Dad. You have impeccable timing." "I was coming to surprise you," he explained. "I was on the jump seat. I wanted to hear your final presentation pitch. Then I heard that woman's voice." He shook his head, a look of deep-seated anger returning. "The world can be an ugly place." "Yes," Amara agreed, her gaze distant. "But sometimes it gets exactly what it deserves." She had no idea how true that statement was about to become. The drama in the first-class cabin of Flight 110 was over. But the real karma for Eleanor Williams was just beginning to gather force, a hurricane spinning silently out on the horizon, ready to make landfall. In the age of the smartphone, nothing happens in a vacuum, especially not in the curated fishbowl of a first-class cabin. Unbeknownst to the main players in the drama, a tech startup founder in seat 3D, a man accustomed to documenting every moment of his life for social media, had discreetly filmed the entire encounter. He had captured Eleanor's initial condescension, Mark's spineless compliance, Amara's quiet dignity, and the stunning arrival of Richard Sterling. He had recorded every word of the CEO's verbal dismantling of the flight attendant and the lifetime ban of the bigoted passenger. Before Flight 110 had even reached its cruising altitude over the Atlantic, the video was uploaded. He had titled it, "CEO of Global Airways demolishes a Karen and fires an employee for harassing his own daughter in first class." He tagged the airline, threw in a few trending hashtags like #FlyingWhileBlack, #KarenStrikesAgain, and #CorporateJustice, and hit post. The internet did the rest. The video didn't just go viral, it went supernova. By the time Amara was sipping a well-deserved glass of vintage Dom Perignon somewhere over Newfoundland, the video had 1 million views. By the time she was sleeping soundly, finally able to rest, it had 10 million. It was the lead story on news aggregators. It was being debated on daytime talk shows, and analysts on cable news were discussing the masterclass in brand management and corporate responsibility demonstrated by Richard Sterling. Amara was lauded as a hero of grace under pressure. Richard was hailed as the CEO of the year, and Eleanor Williams was crucified. The internet, with its terrifying crowdsourced efficiency, identified her within an hour. Her name, her photo, her connection to the powerful family-run conglomerate Williams Industries were all splashed across the web. The hashtag #WilliamsVanity started trending. Memes of her shocked face were already proliferating. For Williams Industries, it was a public relations apocalypse. The company, a massive construction and engineering firm, was already on shaky ground. They had been hit hard by a series of mismanaged projects and were desperate for a lifeline. That lifeline was supposed to be the Phoenix Project, the very project Amara Sterling was flying to London to present. Williams Industries was the lead contractor, the firm that would physically build the skyscraper Amara had designed. The deal, worth billions, was their only path back to solvency. The contracts were drawn up, waiting to be signed, contingent on the final approval of the investor consortium. Eleanor Williams's vital meeting in London. It was with the same investors. She was the family matriarch, there to use her old-world connections and social grace to smooth the final details and celebrate the deal that would save her family's legacy. Instead, she had publicly humiliated and attempted to deplane the single most important person in the entire deal, the visionary architect herself. In the London headquarters of Williams Industries, Eleanor's son, Julian Williams, was watching his world burn. The 50-year-old CEO, a man who had spent his life in his mother's formidable shadow, stared at his phone, his face gray with horror. The calls were coming in every 30 seconds, from his board members who were panicking, from his PR chief, who was in tears, from the investors, whose calls were now glacial. The lead investor, a notoriously ruthless private equity magnate named Alistair Finch had sent a one-line email. "Is what I'm seeing on the BBC true?" Julian knew what this meant. The trust was broken. The deal was on the verge of collapse. His mother, in a single 5-minute act of breathtaking arrogance, had torpedoed the company. When Flight 110 landed at Heathrow, Amara was met by a representative from the airline's executive services. "Sterling," the woman said with a new level of profound respect, "your father has arranged for you to be fast-tracked through immigration. A car is waiting for you on the tarmac." As she was whisked away, Amara's phone buzzed to life, connecting to the local network. It immediately erupted with an avalanche of notifications. Texts from friends, colleagues, even old university classmates who had seen the video. She opened a news app and saw her own face staring back at her. She read the headlines, watched the video, and finally understood the full scope of what had happened. The satisfaction she felt was immense, but it was complex. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about the exposure, the bright, unforgiving light being shone on the quiet, insidious bigotry she and so many others faced every day. The world had seen, and the world was on her side. Her phone rang. The caller ID read, "Julian Williams." She let it ring for a moment, then answered, her voice cool and professional. "Amara Sterling." "Sterling. Amara. This is Julian Williams," he began, his voice strained and desperate. I am calling to offer my most profound, my most sincere, my most abject apology. My mother's behavior was inexcusable. It was disgusting. It does not represent the values of my company or my family." "Doesn't it, Mr. Williams?" Amara replied calmly. "From where I was sitting, it seemed to be the very definition of your family's values." Julian flinched on the other end of the line. "Please, I am begging you. The project, we can't lose this project. It means everything to us, to my employees. There are thousands of jobs on the line." Amara was silent for a long moment, watching the gray London landscape streak past her window. She thought of Mark, the flight attendant whose life was ruined. She thought of her father's pain. She thought of the sting of humiliation she had felt. And then she thought of the power she now held. It was absolute. "The original deal is off the table, Julian," she said, her voice leaving no room for negotiation. "No, please," he begged. "I didn't say the project was dead," she cut in. "I said the deal is dead. If Williams Industries wants to build my tower, it will be on new terms. My terms." A flicker of hope, however terrified, entered Julian's voice. "Anything. We'll do anything." "Good," Amara said, a plan forming in her mind, a plan for a kind of justice that went far beyond one woman's public shaming. It would be a karma that was structural, systemic, and permanent. "I'll have my legal team draft a new contract addendum. It will have new clauses, very specific clauses. I'll send it over in the morning. I suggest you sign it." She hung up the phone, leaving a terrified CEO to contemplate his fate. Amara leaned back against the leather seat of the car. The first battle had been won by her father. The war, she realized, would be won by her. And it wouldn't just be a victory, it would be a reconstruction. The next morning, Amara walked into the meeting with the investor consortium, not as a supplicant but as a conquering hero. The video had made her a celebrity. The investors, led by Alistair Finch, greeted her with a reverence that bordered on awe. Her father was there too, not as a participant, but as a silent, supportive presence in the back of the room. Amara's presentation was flawless. She spoke of glass and steel, of light and shadow, of sustainability and community. She painted a picture of a future where architecture served humanity, and by the end the room was captivated. The Phoenix Project wasn't just a building, it was a testament to a better world. Approval was a foregone conclusion. Then came the question from Finch. "Sterling, a magnificent vision, truly. But we have the delicate matter of your contractor, Williams Industries. In light of recent events, we have serious concerns about their corporate culture and the stability of their leadership." This was her moment. "I share your concerns, Mr. Finch. Amara said, her gaze sweeping across the boardroom. "Which is why I have taken the liberty of renegotiating my company's contract with them. They received the new terms this morning." A junior executive from Julian Williams's team, looking pale and sleep-deprived, was in attendance. He squirmed in his seat. Amara continued, "Williams Industries will proceed as the lead contractor, but only upon their immediate and unconditional acceptance of a new dignity and equity addendum." She outlined the terms. It wasn't just a contract, it was a manifesto. First, Williams Industries was to make a public, unreserved apology, not just for Eleanor's actions, but for the systemic culture of entitlement that allowed them to happen. This apology was to be read on camera by CEO Julian Williams himself. Second, they were to make an immediate 7-figure donation to a charitable foundation chosen by Amara, Blueprint for the Future, a nonprofit she had co-founded that provided scholarships and mentorship for minority students in architecture and engineering. They would be funding the next generation of Amaras. Third, and most significantly, they were to overhaul their entire corporate structure. They had to sign a binding agreement with an independent diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy, a firm Amara would select, to conduct a full audit of their hiring, promotion, and pay practices. They would be legally required to implement every recommendation from that audit within 24 months. Furthermore, they had to establish a permanent, fully funded Office of Corporate Responsibility, whose head would report directly to the board, not the CEO, and would have the power to veto any project or partnership that didn't meet stringent ethical and diversity standards. The room was silent. This wasn't a slap on the wrist. This was a forced rewiring of a company's DNA. "These terms are non-negotiable," Amara concluded. "If Williams Industries does not sign by the end of business today, my firm will walk, and we will find a new contractor who shares our vision for the future, not just in architecture, but in humanity." The message was clear. The price for building Amara's tower was redemption. For Julian Williams, it was a choice between two impossibilities: accept total public humiliation and a revolutionary restructuring of his family's company, or refuse and face certain bankruptcy. The footage of Julian Williams reading the apology later that day was excruciating to watch. He looked like a man being held hostage, not by a person, but by his own mother's legacy of prejudice. He read the statement, his voice cracking, accepting full responsibility, and outlining the new radical steps his company would be taking towards a more equitable future. He never mentioned his mother by name, but he didn't have to. The world knew. The hard karma had hit. It wasn't just a public shaming. It was a fundamental transfer of power. Eleanor Williams, in trying to protect her privileged world from a perceived interloper, had inadvertently handed that same person the tools to dismantle it and rebuild it into something better. Her son was now forced to publicly champion the very values she despised. The family company she was so proud of was now legally bound to become a beacon of the progress she fought against. Her name, once a symbol of social power, was now a permanent synonym for bigotry. Amara watched the broadcast from her London hotel suite, her father by her side. There was no look of triumph on her face, only a quiet, resolute calm. The Phoenix Project would be built. It would be a masterpiece, but its true legacy wouldn't be in its soaring height or its innovative design. It would be in its foundation, a foundation built not just on concrete and steel, but on justice, accountability, and the unshakable truth that a person's worth is not determined by the class of their ticket, but by the content of their character. Eleanor Williams was never seen at a society gala again. She had sought to put a young woman in her place, and in the end she had lost her own, vanishing into a self-imposed exile of shame and irreal Williams. Her world had not just been rocked, it had been permanently, irrevocably, and justly redesigned. 2 years passed. The Phoenix Project began its majestic ascent into the London sky, a spire of glittering glass and green terraces. But the more profound construction was happening inside the offices of Williams Industries. The Dignity and Equity Addendum, which the old guard had initially mocked as the sterling sanctions, had become a force of nature. The consultancy Amara had chosen was relentless and brilliant. They dismantled the old boys network that had governed hiring for generations. Promotions were no longer decided over whiskey at an exclusive club, but through transparent merit-based reviews. Initially, the resistance was fierce. Several senior managers, men who looked and thought just like Julian Williams' father had, resigned in protest, unable to function in a world where their privilege was no longer a currency. Julian, to his own surprise, found that he was glad to see them go. The forced apology had been the most humiliating moment of his life, but it had also been a liberation. He was no longer shackled to his mother's toxic legacy. For the first time, he was leading. The changes were most visible on the ground floor. A young structural engineer named Maria Flores, a brilliant graduate from a state university whose resume would have been previously discarded for not having the right pedigree, was hired. Within a year, she identified a flaw in the original load-bearing calculations for the Phoenix project's upper floors. A subtle but potentially catastrophic error missed by the previous team. Her discovery not only saved Williams Industries millions in potential retrofitting costs, but also prevented a future disaster. She was promoted to lead engineer on the project, a position that would have been unthinkable 3 years prior. Julian Williams flew to London to personally give Maria her promotion. As he stood on the 50th floor of the half-finished skyscraper, looking out over the city, he saw Amara Sterling, who was there for a site inspection. They stood for a moment in silence, the wind whipping around them. "The blueprint for the future foundation is fully endowed," Julian said, not looking at her. "We've funded scholarships for over 100 students this year. Your donation clause, I mean." "That's good to hear, Julian," Amara replied. "And Maria, she's a genius," he continued. "We would never have found her before. My mother, she would have looked right through her." He finally turned to face Amara, his eyes holding a look of genuine, weary respect. "You didn't just save my company from bankruptcy. You saved it from itself. Thank you." Amara nodded, accepting the gratitude. Her karma had not been a simple, fiery act of revenge. It had been a seed of change planted in the hostile soil of a toxic empire, which had unexpectedly taken root and was now beginning to bloom. The Phoenix project was her architectural legacy, but the new Williams Industries, and the hundreds of Mariahs who would now have a chance to build their own futures, was her true masterpiece. It was a karma that didn't just punish, it redeemed. 5 years after the incident on Flight 110, the Phoenix project was complete. The inauguration was the most anticipated event on London's social and business calendar. It stood, breathtaking and alive, a testament to what was possible when vision was paired with will. Sunlight filtered through its sky gardens, and its recycled water cascades murmured peacefully, a stark contrast to the noisy drama of its inception. Amara, now a senior partner at her firm, stood on the observation deck, looking out at the sprawling city. At her side was her father, Richard Sterling. He had recently stepped down as CEO of Global Airways, handing the reins to a successor he had mentored for years. The airline, under his leadership, had become a case study in corporate social responsibility, with the Sterling standard for customer care becoming an industry benchmark. A short distance away, Julian Williams was in deep conversation with Maria Flores. Julian looked older, his hair now more gray than black, but he carried himself with a quiet confidence his former self had always lacked. Maria, now the head of Williams Industries' entire European division, spoke with the easy authority of someone who had earned her position through sheer talent. The company hadn't just survived, it was more profitable and respected than ever before. Its reputation for innovation and ethical practice attracted the best talent from around the world. The old guard was a distant memory. There were 2 people missing from the celebration. One was Mark, the former flight attendant. After his public firing, he had struggled to find work. The viral video was a digital ghost that haunted him, an indelible mark of his worst moment. After months of unemployment and spiraling depression, he'd had a moment of clarity. He used the last of his savings to retrain as a paralegal, specializing in workplace discrimination cases. He now worked for a nonprofit legal aid society, helping people who had been wronged by employers. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay well, but for the first time in his life, he felt he was doing something meaningful. He had once failed a critical test of character. Now, he dedicated his life to helping others pass theirs. In a letter he wrote to Richard Sterling, a letter he never sent, he confessed that being fired was the best thing that ever happened to him, for it forced him to finally see the world from outside his own bubble of privilege. The other missing person was Eleanor Williams. After the incident, she had retreated to the family's sprawling, isolated estate in the English countryside, a prisoner in a gilded cage of her own making. Her society friends, fickle and terrified of being tainted by her disgrace, had abandoned her. Her son, Julian, maintained a strained, formal relationship, visiting twice a year out of a sense of duty, their conversations stilted and circling the vast, unspoken chasm between them. She lived in a world of ghosts, the ghost of her husband, whose legacy she felt she had tarnished, and the ghost of her own social power. She would sometimes watch news reports about the Phoenix Project, her face a mask of bitter resentment. She saw Amara Sterling accepting awards, heard Julian talking about the company's new ethos, and it was like acid in her soul. She could never admit her own fault. In her mind, she was the victim, a martyr to a world that had gone mad with political correctness. She had tried to enforce the natural order of things and had been punished for it. Her karma wasn't a single event, but a slow, creeping erosion of self, a life sentence of lonely, impotent rage. One crisp autumn afternoon, an invitation arrived at the estate. It was printed on heavy, cream-colored cardstock. It was for the official dedication of the Phoenix Project's public plaza. The plaza was being named the Sterling Williams Unity Plaza, a gesture of goodwill insisted upon by Julian and graciously accepted by Amara. Eleanor stared at the invitation, her hand trembling. For a fleeting moment, she considered going. Perhaps she could show them all she was unbowed, but the thought of the faces, Amara's, her son's, the pitying stares of strangers, was too much to bear. She took the invitation, walked to the ornate fireplace in her cavernous drawing room, and dropped it into the flames. As she watched her family name, entwined with the name of the woman she hated, turn to ash, a single dry sob escaped her lips. It was the sound of final defeat. Back on the observation deck, Amara felt a hand on her arm. It was Julian. "She wasn't going to come," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "No," Amara said, her voice soft with a surprising pang of pity. "I didn't think so." "It's better this way," Julian said, looking at the city below. "Some things can't be rebuilt. You have to build something new on top." Amara looked from the proud, reformed man beside her to the magnificent tower around them. She had learned that karma wasn't always a thunderbolt of cosmic revenge. Sometimes it was a quiet, relentless force of construction. It dismantled the rotten structures of prejudice and entitlement, not with dynamite, but by building something stronger, more beautiful, and more just in its place, leaving the old world to crumble into a real Williams in its shadow. The phoenix had truly risen from the ashes, and its light shone on a world that was, because of one woman's refusal to be moved, forever changed. And so, a single act of prejudice aboard Flight 110 didn't just end a career or ban a passenger. It triggered an earthquake that reshaped a corporate empire. Amara Sterling proved that the most powerful response to hate isn't just to endure it, but to use its own momentum to fuel systemic change. She didn't just get an apology, she got a revolution. This story is a powerful reminder that dignity is not negotiable, and that true power lies not in tearing others down, but in having the strength and intelligence to build a better, more just world from the rubble. If this story of ultimate karma and empowerment resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true life dramas where justice is served.